Hello, my name is Canyon Schubert. Welcome to the shorter version of my cryptocurrencies presentation. Um, just a quick side note at the very beginning. I'm going to upload both, but I just recorded a video of this presentation where I kind of just went off and talked about all of my thoughts, and that video ended up being about 28 minutes long. So I'm going to try and keep this one a little bit shorter and concise for grading purposes and such. Anyways, let's kind of hop right into this. Cryptocurrencies are pretty conceptual. I'd go as far as to say they are purely conceptual. And going into this project, I had little to no knowledge about cryptocurrencies at all. Um, I just heard about them talked about in the lectures, and I really wanted to learn more. And I think even with all that I've learned, I've barely really scratched the surface of what I could learn, and I would definitely like to learn a whole lot more. So jumping right in, what are cryptocurrencies? Cryptocurrencies operate really similar to physical money. They just don't have the centralized bank overseeing everything about it. Everyone can exchange currency and keep their own ledger. It's a global ledger that updates based off of voting that people put in. Um, they don't have anything backing them up. It's just a trust that everyone will follow the system. It's similar to say that if I had $5, um, although the US dollar can be backed up with gold reserved, I'm not really sure if that's the case anymore. It's essentially just saying because I have $5, it's worth $5. Everybody in the United States accepts it as $5, so I have $5. Um, Cryptocurrencies work in a similar way. If you have 10 bitcoins, you have 10 bitcoins because everybody in the system trusts that 10 bitcoins equals 10 bitcoins. Pretty simple on that front. My focus in this presentation will be mostly on bitcoins because they're the most successful and most popular cryptocurrency, and it just makes sense to talk mostly about those instead of digging into other ones as well. So Bitcoin was created in January 2009 by Satoshi Nakamoto. It's just an economic system that doesn't revolve around a centralized bank, and it's digital. Not having a centralized bank foregoes transaction fees for the most part. I'll get into why it doesn't completely later. Um, Bitcoin is essentially just an online ledger with account names that are not your actual name, or just an account name. It'll be like a hash of letters and numbers that's generated, and balances that are associated with those. It's not physical in any way. It is purely conceptual and digital. Um, Bitcoins are exchanged like purely just by changing values in the ledger. Like if I gave somebody 10 bitcoins, it would minus 10 from my account in the ledger and plus 10 to theirs. Nothing backs bitcoins, it's only faith in the system, uh, similar to how pretty much any economic system would work. Without centralized control, everyone in the system gets their own copy of the ledger. They keep it up to date. Um, Obviously, that can get out of hand with millions and millions of people having the ledger. So when I get into the more complex bits of Bitcoin later, I will talk about how that's all kept up to date. But first, I wanted to talk about altcoins. I don't want to talk about them too much because they aren't as mildly successful or wildly successful as Bitcoin, and they aren't really as important to learn about for the basics. Up there at the top, I have Dogecoin, then Ripple, then Litecoin, then Ethereum. I don't know about much of the last three, but Dogecoin I did dig a little bit into, so I'll get into that. Most or altcoins are virtually any cryptocurrency other than Bitcoin, just because Bitcoin's the big one. They just decided to call altcoins any other one altcoins, alternative coins. Um, they are kind of split into different usages. One of the usages is people hedging against a Bitcoin crash, kind of like the Great Depression with the US dollar. If Bitcoin crashed like that and a different coin then takes off during that, then somebody that invested in that would suddenly be like a millionaire in US dollars. Another one would be some niche use. This is where I can talk about Dogecoin. Dogecoin was mostly used for tipping people online, like, oh hey, like nice job, here, have some money. Um, Again, it only worked because other people had the coin, and then you could then use that tip to like buy something else. Um, the reason why this niche coin wouldn't take over Bitcoin is because Bitcoin can essentially do the same thing, just transferring money. For it's much easier using Bitcoin, or it's about the same. So it's just like that. It's essentially Dogecoin is just obsolete when compared to that. The other big one is that people would invest into an altcoin because they think it has some future utility that Bitcoin that will like trump out all of Bitcoin's advantages, and then eventually it would become the superior cryptocurrency, and then that would take off, and people would have that. They would then have a lot of money, etc. For the most part, Bitcoin's better than all of the altcoins. Again, future utility, meaning that Bitcoin could eventually fall to one of these, but it's like statistically unlikely that it won't, I would say. Just because Bitcoin has already such a huge following and already works so well. Bitcoin more in depth. There are obvious concerns in the system. What's keeping the ledger up to date? How easy is it to steal money? Can you duplicate money? All that kind of stuff just by going and changing the ledger. Bitcoin has defensive mechanisms and traits that address most of the concerns. When a transaction is sent, it's a block. The block has a transaction message. The message has the sender's name, recipient's name, amount, and then a special key. That transaction key, it takes the first 3 bits. I believe this is how I grasp the concept to work. It takes the first 3 bits of information in that. It puts it through a cryptographic function, including the sender's own like personal key that they get in, that they have, like only they know it, blah blah blah. Then when the recipient gets it, they have a decoding cryptographic function, and if it matches the signature, or if it matches the signature of the sender, then it is valid. It's a valid transaction. It has like checks and balances for that. And then once it's received, it comes out of the pending transaction pool. I think I have that on this slide as well. Once it comes out of the pending transaction pool, it's put on the blockchain, and it's basically one big long list of transactions since the beginning of Bitcoin itself. That's kept up to date, and that is essentially, the transaction chain is essentially, I don't know if it's with the ledger, if it's sent it's kind of like the ledger. It's something like that. It's either sent with it or it's like that. And it's kept up to date. I believe they are like sent together. That would make the most sense to me as to how it works. Anyways, maintainers are the more involved users of Bitcoin that actively keep the ledger up to date. They keep updated copies of the ledger. So like whenever you make a transaction, you send out a transaction message. They receive the transaction messages. The maintainers do. Anybody can be a maintainer, by the way. And when it has a valid signature, they add it to their transaction chain. And adding it to their transaction chain is essentially a vote on which maintainer's ledger is the correct version. These math problems that you have to solve the cryptographic function and add a transaction to the chain is essentially your vote. That means that the majority of the people that put the same transactions in the chain together would be the majority. And then eventually, once that function is solved, then that version is the most updated version. It's sent out to everybody, and then the cycle continues again and again. When a puzzle is solved to be put onto the blockchain, the person who solved it is granted bitcoins from nothing. That's where Bitcoin mining comes from, that concept. You essentially get bitcoins for adding transactions to the chain and for voting for which ledger is the most up-to-date and valid. That circulates bitcoins into the economy. It essentially evenly distributes it around the world. By 2140, it's believed that there will be no more bitcoins being generated like that. Obviously, you don't want infinite bitcoin circulating. Those bitcoins that are generated are kind of like the incentive to help maintain a proper ledger. So once it stops, transaction fees will be put into place as the incentive instead, which back at the beginning of this short version, I said that I don't know why the transaction fees are there, because that's part of the reason why you're avoiding a centralized bank, but I haven't found a reason yet as to why that would be different. But again, that is over 100 years down the line, and that is something that they could look at later on in Bitcoin's life cycle. I'm going to keep this part short in this video just because I don't want to overextend this video again if this is the only one you're watching. If not, you can just go to this portion in my longer video and we're fine. But I think Bitcoin's good, just to answer the questions. I think Bitcoin's good. I think cryptocurrencies as a whole are good. I think having different systems for different things is probably better. Just having currencies that you can interchange with other currencies and put them into place with different systems is good. Um, I don't know if it'll replace physical money, but I think it could come close someday. Um, However, I think necessarily having them together in some regards is just better, just because it kind of like adds security in both senses. It takes the good from both, even though it also takes the bad from both. You know what I'm saying? Um, the trouble in understanding Bitcoin is that it is purely conceptual. It's super hard to wrap your head around the concept of just having a ledger and like no actual physical money, especially given how like deeply ingrained in our minds in the society that physical money means something. Um, Basics of Bitcoins and where to start understanding. Just get your head around the concept that it's a ledger and nothing else with amounts next to it. You can send money, blah, blah. You don't even really need to understand how it's sent. Just understand that it is essentially there, and it's there because you believe that to be the amount of money you have. Um, it's a peer-to-peer system, so it's a trade-off. You get less fees and stuff, but there's also less protection, and things can get out of date and blah blah blah. Summary: Cryptocurrencies are difficult to understand because they're purely conceptual. Learning the basics is a huge step up from no prior knowledge. At least it was for me. Like I said, I think I've just barely scratched the surface of all of this, and I feel pretty good about what I've learned about it. So just going in and knowing more about it would be amazing, and I think there's a whole lot more to learn. I think they're good. I think that Bitcoins and cryptocurrencies kind of face the same problems that physical money do, even though it's like completely different. Like I use it in my longer video, and I really like this analogy. Um, if I'm holding like a $10 bill up in the air and somebody comes by and snags it, um, I'm gone. Like I don't have that $10 anymore. It got robbed. With Bitcoin, it is harder to do that because you need to have the computing power to solve the chain and update your ledger with stealing the person's money and all that. And that's way far. Like that's way harder than just taking money out of somebody's hand. So I think that they definitely have their trade-offs. Um, but I think that Bitcoin's good, and I think that it can face the same problems or maybe even less problems than physical money. There's my bibliography slide for everything else. Thank you for listening to the shorter version of the presentation. I hope I kept it pretty short for this one. Um, if I got anything wrong in this video, if I said anything wrong, or if it kind of seems like I wasn't understanding it, please leave a comment or a feedback, because I would love, 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 love to learn more about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, because one day I hope to invest in them, because I think it's a great idea, and I think that it would be just really cool thing to get into. Thank you for watching, and this concludes my presentation.